What's up guys, Matt with BleepinJeep. Today we're going to be working on the Comanche like I told you in a previous video. It's raining today. You're going to have to deal with that, but otherwise let's get started. Alright, so I got the windows done. Check. Next thing, I want to work on the cooling of this thing. So there's two things I want to do first. Like I told you, I wanted to add a radiator to the rear, but I don't know if that's necessary because it's not like a real bad cooling issue, it's just sort of sometimes. So first thing I want to do, if you'll notice, this radiator, when Jeremy and I built this, we were in a time crunch and we realized that the 84, or I think the 84 to 86 style front clip here was different. So this radiator wouldn't fit back here. So we just stuck it here, and that gives very little room between that and the motor. Probably doesn't do anything for cooling, but I would like to have that extra space just if I need to ever work on anything. So what I want to do is today pull this, pull the front clip. I'm gonna have to modify everything to get this back in here where it's supposed to be. And we've got some coolers for the transmission and power steering inside here, so we might have to move those. But the main thing I want to do is open up these wheel wells. Whoa, there's no light in there. But yeah, I opened them up a tiny bit here, but I need to open them up all the way. And to do that, let's see if there's more light over here. No, not really. To do that, not only will I have to remove anything that's attached to the wheel wells on the insides, but I'll also need to add some sort of structure for the shock tube. So that tube goes up and over and comes back down and is attached there. But if I'm removing this, I'll need to figure out how to now attach it back to the frame. And while I'm at it, I'll go ahead and put some bracing, probably from here down to there somewhere, probably a tube. That thing is quarter plated all the way, but as you saw in that last video, I've got something going on, something is happening, the frame is tweaking or something. And the weakest spot is going to be right in there where I clearanced the frame for the headers to make it fit. It's very narrow right there. So let's get to work. Oh, holy moly. Look at this. So I feel like I just opened a whole new can of worms. I didn't realize, well, I guess I did, I just kind of forgot or underestimated how big these coolers are. So these coolers are, what, 2 inches deep. They are rather large, they're too big. Okay, so the radiator needs to go, this is where the radiator's at now. This is where it needs to go, is in here where these coolers are. Well, that means that the coolers need to move forward. Well, the grill sits right here, so I have about that much room for coolers right here, but the coolers are not going to fit there. So I opened a whole new can of worms for myself there. So now I have to decide, is it worth it to try to cram all that into a tiny space here? Also, the winch is as far back as it'll go, so if I move that grill any further forward, I'll have to re-drill the holes for the winch. So it's just one thing after another. My thinking at this point is I'll cut here and just cut off this whole bottom piece, and then I could just attach the grill to the top and have the bottom kind of angled out more like this, and that'll allow me a little more room. But will it be enough? I'll probably still have to move the winch forward a little bit. It just needs to be barely off of here like that. The only issue with that is, well, it's not too big of an issue, but if you want it to be further back than the bumper, because if you hit a big rock, you don't want it to bust your winch. Okay, well, I got some figuring out to do. Let me put my brain to it and see what we can do here. So if I'm going to do this, I have to pretty much start over from scratch. If you remember, this is an early model which had a GM motor in it, which means the radiator was square. So now I have to cut this out here. Look at that, look how flimsy that is. And cut here on the other side, and then I'll have to cut down here, pretty much refabricate the whole front end, which I guess at this point I've decided that's what I'm doing. Instead of cutting that, let's actually just unbolt it, and then I'll just refabricate the entire thing. Might as well, huh? That's weird. It's bolted, but it's also welded on the back side here. So much for that idea. Ah. All right, I'm opening more cans of worms. I was going to take these fenders off so that I could have more access to work on this, but because of that tube right there, I can't get the fenders off. So that's all right. I'll just have to hold them out like this. Maybe I'll get a rope or something just to hold them out. But anyway, you can see now the kind of tolerances that I was dealing with. Let's see if I can get a light in there. We're talking about like a 1/4 inch here and an 1/8 inch there. It's hard for me to get a light down in there. But you can see the fan is right here and the engine is right there, and there's not 1/4 inch difference between the two. So that's part of the reason that I want to move this radiator back. It's just very, very close to the engine, and all that stuff is moving around in there. So I still have yet to pull this. I'm just going to go ahead and cut all this out from here all the way back, all the way down, and open this whole thing up. It's kind of stuck. It's got wires attached. That's probably why it's so heavy. All right, now that I got everything out of the way, you can really see where this piece has bent. Looking at the frame though, I can't tell that it's bent at all. If you look here, I would think that the shock hoops are what bent in like this, which would have bent this down. And maybe that's the case, but if you look where the shock hoops are coming through the holes, it doesn't look like they've moved at all. So I've got a jack on here. Let's see what happens if I jack it up. Maybe I can get it to bend back a little bit. Whoa! Well, whatever was going on with that, it wasn't tweaked much. Oh! Under pressure. Under pressure. Whoa, I just found something else. Check this out. Right there, look at that. That's my steering shaft. So at one point the power steering went out on this and I had to manhandle it. And I assume that's probably what did it, but you can see the cup is sticking out there. Not sure what holds those in. Is that like a U-joint on an axle shaft, do you think? Are there little clips on the inside? Never dealt with one of those before on a steering shaft. Well, what's it looking like so far? I'm getting into all kinds of crap I didn't want to deal with. Holy smokes, I've opened a can of worms in here. So the problem is I left a lot of the original wiring harness from the original Jeep because I kind of need that for some things. But on the Scorpion, what I did was I took the harness apart and I sat there for days and just cut wires out that I didn't need. On the Comanche, I didn't do that. I just kind of kept everything and still used the wires that I need. But now I've got the wiring harness from the engine and I've got the wiring harness from the Jeep, and they're all kind of mangled and connected together. So that's, I think, part of the problem. Look at down here. That wire from the wiring harness, if I can get, it was like 4 inches from the header and it's still just melted, and that is to the engine. I don't think the wire melted, just the loom. But I have to clean this up bad, and it's the same thing on the other side. There's just so much that needs to be cleaned up, but the problem I'm finding is that they're all connected to something, so I can't just kind of bunch them up nice and neatly because they're all kind of spider-webbed everywhere. So that's what I'm working on now. So what am I doing to try to organize this mess? Well, I'm taking these wires. For instance, this one. I know this one goes to the front clip. Well, the only thing I'm using off the front clip is the headlight wire. So I'm going to start cutting all this back. And if I find wires like this that don't go to anything, I'm just going to remove those and try to narrow this down to as few wires as possible. I assume that these are probably the turn signals and running lights and fog lights and things like that, which I don't need anymore. So I'll just take this loom off and start pulling them back as far as I can get them, and then clipping them off. And if it's a positive wire or something like that, then I'll probably try to put a little piece of tape on it. As you can see, I've done that before. I tried to keep as many wires as possible in the past because I didn't really know what I was going to use later and whatnot, but there's just way too much in here. I've got to get rid. Look at that. That whole bundle right there is just for it necks down, and the only 2 wires I'm using out of this whole bundle is those 2. So I've got to get rid of a lot of these, or basically anything other than the ones connecting to those 2 on this side of the harness. I can cut those out as well, most likely anyway. Now the problem I had on the Scorpion, sometimes I would cut a wire and the engine wouldn't start anymore. So what I did in that case was I would cut like 5 or 6 wires, and then I'd put the key back in and see if the vehicle still operated and everything worked. And sometimes it wouldn't, and I would have to go back and put together those last 4 or 5 wires. The problem is with some of these is that maybe this wire isn't used here, but maybe it goes back somewhere and then ties into a ground or something. So maybe this was grounded and now you've cut the ground out and something doesn't work. So you got to be careful with what you're cutting out. Now the good news is the engine doesn't really work off of any of this wiring harness. So if worst case scenario, all I need to do is rewire my headlights, right? Or maybe the blower motor if I want the blower motor to work. The reason I'm trying to keep a lot of this original Jeep wiring is so that things on the dash will work. But you know, when you've done a motor swap, if you don't want the original dash to work and you want to get rid of all these wires, you can just put in your own gauges for the motor itself. So I probably should have just ran my own headlight wires. This is ridiculous. I'm just gonna cut it shorter and shorter and shorter until I get where I can't cut it shorter anymore. Then on this thing, I'm gonna follow the 2 wires that I need through the connector, so these, and then I'm gonna cut all the rest. Hopefully, I don't need any of that stuff. I guess we'll find out. All right, check it out, guys. I've cleared out most of the way on both sides. I've gotten rid of a lot of wiring. This was the side I thought was going to be the hardest, but with that computer removed, it's not too bad. Now look at all this. All of that is what I took out of there. So hopefully that leaves me with a little more room. And then I went and taped it all up with electrical tape. So now I need to cut all of this out of here, and it's really tight. It's really close to hitting things back there, so I probably can't just torch it with the plasma torch. I'm gonna have to use an angle grinder probably. Okay, I need to use the plasma torch up in here because of the clearances, actually right up through here. And one of the things when you're welding or plasma torching, if you have stainless steel lines anywhere, you need to cover those. Otherwise, you're gonna be sorry and have to replace those, because if you get a little single piece of weld spatter, or if any slag from your plasma torch hits that, it's gonna melt the hole right through it. Cover that up with some tape and hope for the best. Okay, well that's about all I can do for today. Next up, we gotta figure out how to focus. Next time, we gotta figure out how to get that extended down to the frame. I need to add some sort of bar that comes all the way up to the front to support that section, which is very thin. I also need to figure out what to do with this flippity floppity guy. I need to figure out how to remake the entire front clip. I need to figure out where to put the computer and how to keep it from getting wet or muddy. I need to figure out a lot of things. The list just goes on and on and on. So, thank you for watching though. We'll see you and continue with the Comanche project in the next video.